This year has been incredible for me, considering I had one of the biggest flops on Broadway. It's hard for me to understand because I was given something called the Astaire Award and something called the George Abbott Award and the Tony Award and now this. And before I die, I just want one more thing, and that is for the New York Times to say one nice thing about me.
Well, Bob, I'm sorry. That was one wish that you had for the New York Times to say at least one nice thing about you, but it looks like the New York Times is not only saying one nice thing, but two bad things about you. I'm giving you another video in regards to the Fosse Verdon episodes on FX that have been playing for 2 weeks and will be coming up for the few more weeks after this. But there have been two articles in the New York Times that have kind of really put Bob Fosse in a harsh light. And that's why I'm titling this, Is This a Hit Job on Bob Fosse? And I'm going to discuss that article a little bit and show a couple of videos, and we'll talk a little bit more about this aspect. So what we're going to do right now is just go to these two aspects of the New York Times. So let's pull over to here. Now this is the first article, but I'm going to pop back over to here. There was an article on April 10th, 2019 by Brian Siebert, and this is Hands, Hips, Hats, the why and how a Fosse Verdon dance moves. And there's lots of things in here I can discuss, but we're not going to do that today. I'm going to save that for a future video. But this is actually what spurred me to do my last video about how the dance Who's Got the Pain was created. But we're going to go over to this one. And this one is March 29, 2019 by Alexis Solowski. And here's the title, Fosse Verdon has magic to do and undo. So we already have something leading off telling us that whether there's something wonderful in the work of Bob Fosse, but there's something that we just can't have, or that we have to show what was going on behind that, and it's not something we're particularly happy with. So if we go into this article, you know, a little bit of an intro into Bob Fosse about who he was, of course, that he won the Oscar, the Emmy, and the Tony. But here we have a quote from Thomas Cale. Thomas Cale says, "I don't think it's possible to do a musical that has dance in it and not have the influence of Fosse." Well, who is Thomas Cale? Okay, well, let's take a look. We look up Thomas Cale on Wikipedia, and many of you might know him because he is a director of both In the Heights and Hamilton. So he is somebody who is very currently doing a lot of very high-level work on Broadway. But if we look into Thomas Cale, well, he grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, a pretty nice area. I know I used to live in that area. Graduated from the Sidwell Friends School, which is a highly selective Quaker school located in Bethesda, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., and subsequently graduated from Wesleyan University in 1999. So this is someone who's come up in a pretty nice atmosphere and has been through a lot of the current way of teaching that goes on in universities. So if we go back to this, I don't think it's possible to do a musical that has dance in it and not have the influence of Fosse. And on the outside, that almost sounds like a great compliment. But as we go into this, we're going to find out that that's something that they're actually not happy about, and really trying to look at how to, what the term is, reframe the work of Bob Fosse in a different light. Okay, so we go in here. He directed Hamilton. He's executive producer on the Fosse Verdon show, and how the show was based on Sam Watson's exhaustive 2013 biography. So here we talk a little bit about why this clash. Well, Gwen Verdon was also involved in this equation. Fosse often shaped his choreography on her body, which means that she shaped it too, and she taught it to dancers in turn, even after she and Fosse separated. Her inclusion also suggests a narrative informed by the Me Too movement, a way to reframe the myth of the lone male auteur, of the man who behaves badly, but still, my God, those steps. So here we have right here the labeling of Bob Fosse in terms of his behavior as bad. And certainly Bob Fosse has a reputation for many aspects in his life which really did drive his work. But right off the bat we see it's bad. So we're talking here Alexis Solowski. Well, let's pull up her bio. And she's a theater critic for the New York Times and The Guardian. She contributes to The New Yorker. She's a postdoctoral lectureship in literature, humanities in Columbia University, where she earned her doctorate in English and comparative literature. She also taught at Barnard College. So she is somebody who's also of a very new way of thinking in terms of what universities dogma is. And this is, I think, being applied to Bob Fosse. So let's go on with this. If Fosse-Verdon succeeds, it could inform how we now tell stories about men like Fosse, assuming we should tell these stories at all. And that's a kind of a big statement right there, assuming we should tell these stories at all. In other words, Bob Fosse has behaved so badly, this is somebody who should disappear from our viewpoint, that we should not know about this person. Because if Fosse was a great man, he wasn't necessarily a good one. Okay, so we have the term good, and defining, well, what is good? That's something that it's definitely has a changing moray in today's world, and we're looking back to a different world and applying those things against that different time. He had genius, he had charm, but coercion and scapegoating colored his rehearsals, and he rarely met a chorus girl he didn't try to bed. Again, looking at the way he worked and putting certainly a label on that, which is something that in the past certainly was there, was noticed, but was not to the point where this person needs to be sort of eliminated from how we look at the history of musical theater. We go on here. Now, in making Fosse-Verdon, the showrunner Stephen Levinson knew what he didn't want to create another story about a brilliant man haunted by demons who behaves badly and does terrible things. So Stephen Levinson. So let's look up Stephen Levinson. Now, he's also somebody who is doing very big work on Broadway right now. Tony Award for the Best Book of a Musical for Dear Evan Hansen. He also was raised in Bethesda, Maryland, another very affluent area, attended St. Andrew's Episcopal School and Brown University. So Stephen is somebody who has been through the very recent training in terms of the way we look at the world, and looking at the life of Fosse in a whole different viewpoint from a different time period, an earlier time period. Okay. And was it worth it to look at him? No, of course it's not worth it. So there's very definite judgments made based in a certain way of looking at the work of Bob Fosse. They talk about how it came together, how they talked to Nicole Fosse, who was Bob and Gwen Verdon's daughter. They talk a little bit here about how Fosse and Verdon were two lost souls. So why had Fosse's name endured and Verdon's hadn't? That's quite a statement. Certainly Bob Fosse's name is big in musical theater world and in film. Gwen Verdon is also a very, very well-known star. To say that her name hasn't endured is quite a statement. That's just not truthful. There is something you could say, because she was a performer, she was a star, but in somebody like that, they're big as long as their performance is up there. Whereas Bob Fosse created shows which have endured long past his death. Chicago is still on Broadway. Chicago was made into a musical. Those things are keeping Fosse's name, and certainly there are people who are Bob Fosse devotees who have kept his name going, particularly with the Fosse show that came out in 1999. So that kind of statement, why hadn't her name endured, it just really doesn't go with me. I don't see how that's a truthful statement. And then here, how these complicated partnerships and collaborations become about one person, almost always the man. Well, that's a judgment call. Certainly Bob Fosse was a great creator in so many ways, so many films he created. He deserves a lot of credit. And Gwen Verdon certainly was a collaborator with him in terms of making the work, but she did not make all of the work. It really came from Bob Fosse, who was driving it forward. Let's see. Here, like, why is this an interesting story? Is this just another awful person who made great art? So here we have Bob Fosse being labeled as awful. that certainly is not the viewpoint of Bob Fosse from anybody who worked with him. Certainly he was demanding, he was challenging, he was not the most straightforward person, but to say he was an awful person is really putting a label on somebody that just isn't a truthful evocation. So again, not something that we really want to have applied to Bob Fosse. We have to tell this story because of the way he behaved in spite of the way he behaved. So in other words, his behavior was so bad, we still have to mention it because it was just so bad. Speaking of Williams, who plays Gwen Verdon in the film, speaking by telephone, she says, thank you to the, dryly, thank you to the movement, we are now going to find out who Gwen Verdon is. Again, that's just a crazy thing. Maybe if somebody is from today's time, is grown up in today's time, they would not have known about Gwen Verdon, but that's kind of, again, a statement to me that is not a realistic statement, because certainly anybody who knows about musical theater history knows who Gwen Verdon is. That's kind of a crazy statement. Okay. Let's see. Oh, now here's a wonderful photo here. Fosse Verdon is informed by the Me Too movement a way to reframe the myth of the lonely male auteur of the genius who behaves badly. Here's badly again. And this photo is giving very much like he's just leering at the chorus girl. Well, I mean, Fosse was somebody certainly who got down on the ground because he's a film director. There's so many shots of him looking at different angles at how to look at things. It's really interesting that this is the photo that they used as opposed to other photos. Now, if we drop down here, here is an actual photo of Fosse and Gwen Verdon. We here seen in 1966. She often taught his choreography to the dancers in his show. This is an actual photo. This is a much different representation of their relationship. Just take a look at that, as opposed to what this photo is saying. And this is coming from the Fosse Verdon show. Let's see. And this is a wonderful thing too. Now, as the writer visited the set where they were shooting in Long Island, Grumman Studios on Long Island, cameras were placed to shoot. Big spender from Sweet Charity. The dancers wriggled in their stilettos and miniskirts, sequins skittering. They looked like unadulterated sex until you looked closer. Behind the fake eyelashes, these dance hall girls were dead inside. Fun, laughs, good times? Not exactly. Well, that's exactly who they're supposed to be. That was where their characters, and that is something that Fosse was bringing out as part of the Hey Big Spender dance, and as part of that place where they all inhabited in terms of their dance hall. This is exactly what he was trying to do. He wasn't trying to portray them in a bad way. He was portraying reality. And so to make this seem like he was purposely trying to make them a certain way, that's just wrong. Not wrong. Here we talk about how he experienced transactional sex too early and too often. Well, yes, he did. He certainly had a very unusual upbringing with his dancing in strip joints in Chicago when he was 13, 14, 15 years old. And here's a statement about what Levinson called Fosse's self-hatred mixed with self-aggrandizement. Well, certainly he was somebody who didn't think of himself as having a lot to offer, but he definitely wanted to be somebody. So, I mean, anybody who's that deeply involved in whether it's film or theater or performance, you got to have an ego. It's very unusual for somebody to say, I'm going to be a strong person in that field and not have some desire to have themselves be somebody in that field. But to label this as self-hatred and self-aggrandizement, it's just like way over the top on each. I would definitely soften those both from here. Sam Walkerell, who plays Fosse in the show, gets into this, and he's quoted as, he was so destructive to everyone around him, especially the women in his life. And I'm going to show a couple videos in a moment, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how Gwen Verdon, at least, had a relationship with Fosse. It's really a stretch to say he was destructive to everyone around him, especially the women in his life. And we're going to see that. And Cale says, I refuse to buy into the idea that you need acrimony and tension to create great work, to create great work. Okay, so acrimony. Did Bob Fosse make acrimony on set? I mean, he was somebody who demanded what he wanted. He was somebody who was very direct, but acrimony, I mean, everybody has a different idea between a director and a producer, between a director and an actor. That's not something that I think that he culled. That's not something that he looked for to make. So to say that he needed acrimony, tension is always good in rehearsals. I mean, there's something about when something is on a line and it has to be done, and it does pull things out. It makes you very present. Um, I refuse to buy into the idea that you need acrimony and tension to create great work, he said. And that's a personal opinion. That's one personal opinion. That may not be what other people who worked with Bob Fosse felt. Williams, again, who plays Verdon in the show, she says, when I feel safe is when I can be most expressive and completely free. Again, that's a personal opinion. That works for her. That is not something, I'm sure if you dealt with a lot of people who worked with Bob Fosse, they would not have to say that that's the only way that they could work. In an environment like what Fosse created, that person wouldn't be safe. And again, that's really a stretch, and that's really looking at things from a certain viewpoint of today and trying to apply it to a different time. I don't know if people from that time would have been as strict as what that statement says. Um, let's see. But again, of course, Gwen, she just wanted to stay high and bright on top of everything. She just gave joy. When you watch her dance, you feel her love for it. That's true. She definitely was bright. She was on it. There was a definite joy in her dance. But she certainly wasn't going through the things that Fosse had to do to create these films, these great shows. So there's a little bit difference in terms of what was expected of her and the stress of what the result would be, for sure. Okay. And then here is something again from Levinson, I believe it is. A lot of these artists, once you know the personal stuff, you realize that it was there all along in the work. So I can't enjoy it in an uncomplicated way. Enjoy is like no longer quite the word. So we're looking at the aspect of, well, now that I know something about the person, I can no longer enjoy the work because that part is just makes me feel so bad or is detestable to me. And gosh, life is tough. I mean, you have to look at things for what they are and not be so hurt and wounded that you can't look at something for what the creation is because you only think. I mean, if we think about that, we'd have to get rid of West Side Story because Jerome Robbins certainly was a brute. We'd have to get rid of Jack Cole. He was a tyrant. We would have to get rid of Martha Graham. She was to the point. You'd even have to practically get rid of Catherine Dunham at the same time. You look at those techniques that they created, there was no baloney. It was all extremely hard work, hard dedication, pushing, pushing, pushing. I'm sure that their rehearsals were not just a bundle of joy. So it's like getting rid of, anything of the past. That's a little bit strict. So anyway, that is this article. We're going back to the top. Fosse Verdon has magic to do and undo by Alexis Solowski. I think it's a little bit tilted, not a little bit, a whole lot tilted in terms of a feminist viewpoint and the Me Too movement, and seeing Fosse from a very narrow viewpoint that many, many other people would not share. Now, I'm going to go on to some videos now. We're going to pull up QuickTime. So we have, there was a section in the episode of just last week when they were working on Who's Got the Pain, and in which Gwen Verdon in the show was contributing steps to Bob Fosse, and she even makes the mention that, well, Jack Cole didn't mind when I would give him steps, which in my mind, knowing about Jack Cole, that is not something that I would see as being accurate. Jack Cole certainly did not take a lot of suggestions from anybody else. But here is an interview with Gwen Verdon from 1983 by Ryan Keating. And let's talk about her, Gwen Verdon's prowess or interest in choreography.
Things people assume when you're a dancer that it's a natural progression to become a choreographer. But in your case, you find that's not so.
It's not so. I could take Jack Cole's dancing and do it sort of inside out and backwards and forwards, and you'd swear it was a Jack Cole dance. I can do the same thing with Bob Fosse, because those two people I worked with for so long and studied with for so long. But to come up with an original idea of my own, I couldn't do it.
Okay, so to come up with an original idea of her own, she couldn't do it. So she definitely gives the impression that, yes, she can mimic the steps of people she's worked with, but she is not a choreographer on her own. And I think that that is something that is not being brought out in the Fosse Verdon show. It's giving the impression that she had so much to give, but was being held back, or whatever she did contribute was not attributed to her, which is, that again, that's the way it was. Peter Gennaro choreographed a significant part of West Side Story, was never credited for that. I mean, you could go on and on and on and find instances of that, okay? Now, as to this fact about being so destructive to all of the women in his life, and there's a scene where they're on the beach in Mallorca, and Gwen Verdon is so upset in the scene in the show. But here again, this is 1983, and this is a little bit different opinion of Bob Fosse given by Gwen Verdon.
Oh, sure, we have a child. We have Nicole Fosse, who is fabulous. She's with Cleveland Ballet. And he's my best friend. And I think, you know, finally the day will come when all the chips are down. We are the best friends to one another.
We are the best friends to one another. That's hardly what was portrayed in the film. In the film, it was portrayed he was so destructive. I want to give a little something, and this is just a funny little thing. You see John Travolta there. This is actually from the film Stayin Alive, if anybody remembers that. And John Travolta as Tony Manero, and also Finola Hughes in here. But this is interesting in terms of being used in show business, the way everybody's trying to get to the top. It is a cutthroat business, and everybody uses everybody. So, and that's just the way the business is. So to somehow apply this only to Bob Fosse is just missing the whole aspect of what people are doing in musical theater as they try to climb their way to the top.
Do you think you're dealing with some little groupie that jumps when you call? Is that who you think I am? We met, I liked you, we made it. What do you think it was? True love. And you think I used you. What about you using me? Everybody uses everybody, don't they?
Everybody uses everybody. So that's just kind of the way it is in the business. And I don't think it's something that we need to call out one particular person and call them bad and awful for something that is just the way it's been done. You know, if that was the case, then you need to indict the entire business and not just one individual person. This is a little bit about Bob Fosse and just his sense of mediocrity, that he's worried about himself and why he pushes himself and why he demands out of other people. And maybe that's one of the reasons why other people who work with him might feel that is kind of a tense situation being in his presence.
You have this incredible desire for perfection that comes through on the stage. It came through in the film. Where does that come from?
I don't know. I just, I can't stand mediocrity when I go to the theater myself, or sloppiness in any way. I think I have a dreadful fear within myself that there's a great streak of mediocrity in me and a great streak of laziness.
I've read you are your own worst critic.
Yeah, I think probably. No, I've read some that are worse. Anyway, I'm so afraid that this sense that I have in myself, this indolent streak that I have, will take over, that I work twice as hard and I try to make things as good, you know. I mean, I used to rehearse all night long because I thought, every other director and choreographer is sleeping. So I'm getting
But you do that, don't you?
So Bob Fosse is somebody who works incredibly hard at what he does and expects other people to work that hard too. If it does create a situation where it's not the most fun situation, you know, it's a little bit tense situation, that's all in the service of trying to make the best possible performance. People of today might feel a little bit different, but from Fosse's world, that's the way it was, and people certainly worked with him and enjoyed his work. Now I'm going to finish up by a clip from this long video, and I would recommend that if you're at all interested in the subject, you check this out. I'll put a link in the description. This is Bob Fosse, The Madman as Artist by Gwen Verdon. Now Gwen Verdon was actually the music editor on the film All That Jazz. So he worked very directly with Bob Fosse, seeing that film over and over and over again as they laid in all of the musical aspects of that film. He has and Glenn is also involved with psychology, so he has a very different way of viewing Bob Fosse and his work and what was underneath him, all of the hurt things that he had in his past that were coming out in his film. So I would advise, take a look at this. It's an hour long, but we're going to see the ending section of this just to get a little bit more of an idea of what this person felt like after working with Bob Fosse.
There's still something missing from understanding a character like Gideon or Fosse, with his combination of creativity and destruction. The final clue is to be found in the central symbol of the film. There's something wrong with Gideon's heart, which reminds me of a quote by my favorite Chinese sage, a guy named Mencius. And he said, "Pity the man who has lost his path and doesn't follow it, and has lost his heart and doesn't go out and recover it." When people's dogs and chicks are lost, they go out and look for them. But when people's hearts or original nature are lost, they do not go out and look for them. The principle of self-cultivation consists in nothing but trying to find the lost heart. The problem was, he had a lost heart. Now certainly, both cause and effect of having a lost heart is pain. And Fosse was blind to the pain of others because of his own pain. He sacrificed his whole life for showbiz, and what did he get? All the smug critics who wouldn't dare risk creation themselves, calling this movie a self-indulgent ego trip. And he believed that he never became a significant artist. And what we see in this film is that he believes that he was a failure as a human being. But this leads to a few final ironies. Though Fosse depicts himself in the harshest light in this movie, in my experience, Bob Fosse was the kindest man that I ever worked with in showbiz. Fosse's life was meaningless, but he gave meaning to everyone that he worked with. He made my life meaningful. Fosse was our mad captain. He was driven by a mortal wound that led him to fight nature itself in a battle he was doomed to lose, but to the last man we were all willing to go down with him. And you know why? Because in work, in art, in life itself, there are few opportunities to take something all the way, to go beyond your best, to be able to say, this is what's in my heart. And in my small, humble contribution to this movie, Bob Fosse made it possible for me to do that. And for that, I will always love him.
So that is just a wonderful ringing endorsement of Bob Fosse, what he was about, what made him tick, and how it was like to work with him from a much different viewpoint of looking at this person from today's viewpoint and not having experienced that work with him and putting on a judgment from there. So again, as Bob Fosse said, I would just love for once to have the New York Times to say one nice thing again about me. And now we have two articles that are basically saying the same thing. So please take these things with a grain of salt. I'm going to be picking up the next article in another video and talking about that Who's Got the Pain choreography once more. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got some information. And again, I'm Bob Boross, and this is my Jazz and Tap Dance Life. Thanks for watching.